Sir, we are beaming pure, uninterrupted solar power from deep space down to the planet's surface.
What the...
It's been a tough morning. Hello and welcome once again to Almost Breaking News, right here on the Everything Electric channel. My name is Robert Llewellyn and I've got some tasty morsels of positive news from around the small blue dot we call home. Coming up, how much energy does a Tesla semi-truck consume and how does that compare to a similar-sized diesel truck? Beaming solar power from outer space. What the... Some actual factual research to dispel some common myths surrounding the availability of minerals for making batteries. A powerful electric tugboat is launched in Vancouver docks. The world's largest floating wind farm goes online. Amtrak's first electric bus goes into service. The start of a truly massive ramp-up of battery manufacturing. And a British company starts recycling thousands of tons of batteries in Germany. All this and more on Almost Breaking News. But just before we start, I'm going to mention once again the absolute numpties who play at being journalists at a great British newspaper known as The Sun. Now, they've clearly been told by their fanatic and dangerous boss, one Rupert Mad Dog Murdoch, to create toxic anti-electric vehicle news stories every single day. Not just like when they come up, no, every day you've got to put one out, which means they get more and more ridiculous and desperate. I almost feel sorry for a poor young intern, probably unpaid, who's just left university and has lowered himself into the stinking septic tank of embittered hatred known as the Sun newsroom. I'm not going to name him, but he allegedly writes these stories. Here are just a few of the pathetic stories they publish every single day. They are obsessed, frantic, hysterical, and clearly utterly desperate. I can't help wondering what the readers of this dreadful old rag think of this obsession. I mean, can't they do some sort of celebrity gossip stories or something? I mean, there's perfectly reasonable stories about electric vehicles that can be legitimately critical. The charging infrastructure is still in its infancy. A new electric car still is more expensive to buy than a new petrol car. Yada, yada, yada. Great big heavy trucks burn billions of gallons of diesel every day as we shift stuff around on the world's roads. Per kilo of goods carried, they are quite efficient. Nowhere near as efficient as a train, but we've got used to them, and that's the price we pay to have the access to the goods that they move around. And we've covered electric trucks on the channel many times, but here's some new data that has just come out recently since the widespread adoption of Tesla semi-trucks by Pepsico in the USA. They're currently running 36 of these trucks with distances covered every day between 100 to 500 miles, obviously on a single charge. And over these now thousands of journeys, they've come up with some impressive figures for energy consumption. The program manager running 18 of the trucks stated that PepsiCo achieves an average efficiency of 1.7 kilowatt hours per mile with the Tesla Semi, fully loaded. I said semi there. We say semi in this country. That is the equivalent of 1.1 kilowatt hours per kilometre. That is, I think, is unbelievable. A lot of that is due apparently to regenerative braking. So if you imagine the mass of, say, a 1.5 or a 2-ton car going down a hill, an electric car, you definitely generate a chunk of power as you go down. All electric car drivers have experienced this. Your range actually increases a little bit. Not a lot, but a little bit. Now, increase that weight to a 36 or even 38-ton truck going down a slight hill, maintaining the same speed. You are generating megawatts, and you're not using the brakes, which is how traditional trucks have to slow themselves down when they're going down a hill. And that not only increases range, It reduces overall energy use per kilometre. The Tesla Semi has a drive system consisting of 3 electric drives, one for the most efficient constant speed once it's moving, and the other 2 are for acceleration to get the truck moving. The battery in these trucks can be charged with up to 1 megawatt, thanks to a 1,000-volt system built into the truck. So they're talking about, from experience, from 5% to 90% in the battery takes under 20 minutes. And remember, a truck driver has to make a statutory break every now and then. They have to stop. It's the law. So once a suitable charging infrastructure is installed around the country, which is happening as we speak, we could see big increases in large electric trucks, long distance driving, and a massive corresponding decrease in oil burning and air pollution. Oh, and for the companies running the trucks, and again, this comes from the research at Pepsico, a mind-numbing decrease in fuel and maintenance costs.
Sir, we are beaming pure, uninterrupted solar power from deep space down to the planet's surface.
Now, this does sound like science fiction, but scientists and engineers at the California Institute of Technology, Caltech, have just announced that they have indeed sent power collected on a satellite up in space down to a detector on the Earth's surface. The satellite was launched in January this year and obviously has a solar array that powers it. And at the moment, this is still a small experimental device. But the important part of the story is they managed to capture about 200 milliwatts on a microwave receiver on Earth. It was a very consistent power supply and basically proves that the system works. There are already plans to create what is effectively a solar farm in space, a series of satellites with massive solar arrays attached that would beam down gigawatts of power 24 hours a day. The satellite can be positioned far enough away from the Earth to always be in sunlight, so we never have to hear someone whining, "What about when the sun doesn't shine?" This idea is not new. It was toyed with in the 1970s during one of the endless oil crises we've all been afflicted with since we've all been addicted to the toxic filth of hydrocarbons. Just thought I'd get that dig in. But back then, solar technology was in its infancy. Solar panels were developed by NASA to use in space, to be able to capture energy in space. They cost millions. They were ridiculously expensive. And launching into space, anything into space then, was crazy expensive. But solar cells, as we know, and microwave systems and collectors are now much, much cheaper and much more efficient. Robots capable of assembling structures in deep space will soon be in orbit, and companies such as SpaceX have slashed the cost of launching things out of our atmosphere. Recent studies commissioned by the European Space Agency and the UK government suggest giant orbiting generators will soon be able to generate electricity at costs comparable to earthbound nuclear plants. So not cheap, but hey baby, baseload solar power, 24/7, 365. And yes, as always, I'll believe it when I see it. But this stuff is developing, and it is clearly now not impossible. It is possible to send electricity from deep space down to the Earth's surface. We've heard plenty of stories about how there aren't enough materials on the planet to make all the fancy electric cars for all the virtue-signalling uber-elite eco-fascists that want to ram them down our throats. Oh wait, sorry, I was reading that from Truth Social. I mean the millions of perfectly normal people who want to use a slightly more efficient, cleaner and easily recyclable alternative to combustion engine oil burners. Anyway, a radical tree-hugging, crazy, loony newspaper called the Financial Times in London recently ran a very big story about the myths surrounding the availability of minerals for batteries and electronics. It makes for very interesting reading. Links for all these stories are in the show notes, but essentially they separate the ridiculous myths from the genuine concerns. Because of course there are loads of ridiculous myths. Read The Sun if you're in doubt. But there are also real problems and challenges in making this massive global industrial transition away from burning fossil fuels. For example, we need to find 5 billion cubic meters of water annually every year to facilitate the refining and production of all the minerals needed to make billions of batteries. 5 billion cubic meters? That's insane. Until you compare it to the 2,700 billion cubic meters of water needed for global food and fibre production. Yes, we need a lot of water to grow our cotton socks, bless us. But we also need to reuse the materials and the water that we dig up or extract. Impossible with coal. It's impossible with oil. It's impossible with gas. But it's very possible with minerals. The article states, and I'm quoting from the Financial Times now, new battery designs have reduced future cobalt needs by 50% in just 5 years. Nickel-free LFP batteries are now being used in 40% of electric vehicles. By 2040, over 50% of lithium used in new batteries could come from recycling. Regulation increasingly requires complete recycling of all battery materials. Interesting. And here's another quote. There are enough copper and lithium sources to meet global needs in 2050, and we are talking trillions of tons by then. But the plans already announced for extracting that supply fall short of meeting likely demand in 2030. New mines and refineries must be built. Financial flows to developing countries must be increased, and planning systems reformed to allow some mine and refinery development in rich countries. So that's anything but plain sailing, but it's not the doom scenarios being pumped out every day by the three-faced lying fossil fuel lobby industry scumbags. Not that I don't like them. And just to hammer the point home, they are constantly lying about this stuff, and they know it, and they get paid a metric ton of money to keep on lying to us. Canada's first all-electric harbour tugboat made its debut off the coast of Vancouver earlier this month. Brilliant! I mean, what's not to love? This is a big, powerful tugboat that has easily been electrified, and they can work in coastal areas. They don't travel great distances across oceans, and a tug needs power, which electric motors can deliver instantly and chunkily. 5 of these big tugs are slated to arrive in Vancouver before moving north to provide ship assist and towing services to, wait for it, to huge oil and gas ships at a new liquefied natural gas export facility in Kitimat, British Columbia. Now, I'm not saying this is bad. I'm just putting the story in context, using newer, cleaner technology that can be powered by renewables alone to help export old, dated and dirty technology that still generates massive profits and corrupts governments and societies all around the world. Isn't that lovely? Staying on the ocean, the world's largest floating offshore wind farm, called Hywind Tampen, was inaugurated recently by global power giant Equinor and its partners. Now, there are massive wind farms all over the shippity shop, many of them much, much bigger than this one. So what's the big deal about this one? Well, the Hywind Tampen array consists of 11 8.6 megawatt turbines. They are massive. It's located around 140 kilometres or 87 miles off the Norwegian coast in a water depth of between 260 and 300 metres, 853 to 980 feet. What the... Surely they can't put a tower into the seabed that's well over 300 metres tall before it even reaches the surface. No, of course not. That's why it's a floating wind farm. These behemoths are attached to the seabed by massive sea anchors and huge cables. But what this means is there are vast new areas of ocean where we can install wind turbines, not just a few miles offshore where the water is shallower. And these bad boys are constructed on land or in harbours, and then they're floated and then they're towed out once they're complete. Towed out and anchored. Unbelievable technology. And where is all this power going that the Norwegians are developing? Well, no one is talking about it powering 500,000 homes, which is what this little wind farm could do. No, this floating wind farm will provide electricity for the Snur and Gullfaks oil and gas fields in the Norwegian North Sea. I've made this point before and I'll make it again because it is always ignored by the old school media, by old school automotive journalists, by old school automotive publications. When we measure the impact of driving combustion cars, we only measure the tailpipe emissions. That is a massive, global, devastating lie, con job on the human race. The energy consumption to get that fuel we burn out of the ground, transport it around the globe and eventually refine it before we burn it once is massive. And this wind farm is a beautiful, exquisite example of that. Why would the Norwegians spend so much money developing and deploying a massive floating wind farm? This has cost billions of euros just to power some offshore oil rigs. Because up until this happened, they were burning millions and millions of gallons of diesel every year, generating the power they need to keep these massive constructions operating and extracting the oil and gas. They run huge pumps that are as big as a house, and they are electric motors. Where does the electricity come from? It comes from burning diesel. That's long before you pump that fuel into your car. Multiple terawatt hours a year just to extract the fossils. Forget exporting and refining, transporting and all the other that use vast amounts more. This is just simply to pump the oil and gas out of the ground. It's a devastating, destructive and unsustainable system. So that is lovely. Everything is lovely. Let's move on. Many decades ago, when I was a young, slim man with an actual mop of dark, thick hair on my head, hard to believe now, I caught a bus from Vancouver in Canada to Seattle in Washington State, US of A. It was obviously a diesel bus run by Amtrak, which is the rail company. Bit confusing. And I now know I didn't consider for one moment that this was a diesel bus. For me, back in the day, it was just a bus. Well, now Amtrak have recently introduced their first 100% electric bus on this very route. It's a 200-mile round trip, and the bus does this easily on one charge. Now, the only reason I mention this is because we're now very used to electric buses in cities doing set routes again and again. There's about 1,000 of them in London. But this is a long intercity rural route, and I think we're going to see more and more of these buses being adopted. The 14-metre-long Van Hool CX45E has a 660 kilowatt-hour Proterra lithium-ion battery system and 260 miles of range, fully loaded with passengers in the rain going up and down hills. Using a single bus on this route will save approximately 10,000 gallons of diesel fuel being burnt every year. And of course it can, I'm not saying it is, but it can be powered exclusively with renewable electricity.
Well, everything have technology have changed, like computers and everything, and have changed, like one day this computer is the bomb, the next day it's obsolete. And this is what's going on with the buses now.
Very good. Recently, we've been reporting on the impact the Inflation Reduction Act has had within the US and in the wider global economy when it passed into law in August of 2022. And here's a very concrete result of that legislation and budget availability. US battery manufacturing capacity is set to grow tenfold in the next 4 years. Massive battery factories are being built all over the country, but none bigger than those being built by LG, the Korean battery maker. This is from a report by Canary Media, who state that LG Energy Solution already operates a 5 gigawatt-hour battery production facility in Michigan. That means they make 5 gigawatt hours of battery storage in a year. That's what we're talking about. But they will soon quintuple production at that very facility by 2025. And while that's happening, they'll be building a new complex capable of making 43 gigawatt hours worth of batteries per year near Phoenix, Arizona. It's working on a plant with 30 gigawatt hours of capacity with Hyundai in Savannah, Georgia. Another one with 40 gigawatt hours of annual capacity with Honda in Ohio, and a total of 140 gigawatt hours of capacity with GM's Ultium battery brand across sites in Ohio, Michigan and Tennessee. So why is this report in the least bit interesting? Well, just 6 years ago, in 2017, the entire global battery manufacturing capacity on the planet was around 200 gigawatt hours a year. And as we all know only too well, most of that was in China. It currently stands at around 1,500 gigawatt hours of manufactured battery capacity a year, or 1.5 terawatt hours if you like. By 2028, when all the factories currently being built, and the ones I've just listed, will be operating at full capacity, along with others all over the globe, the total global output of batteries is estimated to be close to 2.8 terawatt hours a year. It's a massive increase. It's already planned, the materials needed are being accounted for already, and we will see a huge shift in the machines we all rely on. There's going to be a lot more that rely on batteries. A huge shift away from burning fossil fuel. So we've done battery manufacturing. Here's a couple of battery recycling stories to end with. The first from Jaguar. They have started a partnership with Wix Engineering, a British company that specialises in refurbishing old industrial technology, to reuse old Jaguar IPACE battery packs to harness solar and wind power. Now, the battery pack in an IPACE comes with a built-in inverter in the pack, so the whole unit is taken out in complete, it's not changed at all, it's taken out of the car and it's slid into a specially built container, and there is zero modification. It's incredibly quick. It is then wired up to a control unit, and bingo, you have static storage with near zero hassle. Each system will include 30 batteries from Jaguar prototypes and test vehicles with a system capacity of 2.5 megawatt hours. Now, I just want to point out that the reason they're using batteries from prototypes and test vehicles is because the batteries in the cars are still working fine, and no one's going to take them out and reuse them in somewhere else. They're still useful. Now, this is a massive growth sector, so we're going to see big changes over the next few years. Second life battery supply for stationary applications could exceed 200 gigawatt hours per year by 2030, creating a global value of over $30 billion. I wonder if it's worth investing in this if you're one of those people that invests in things. Not like me. I've never done it. Jaguar quotes research that's been recently done by McKinsey Associates. When a battery pack comes to the end of its useful life in a car like the IPACE, it will still have 70 to 80% of its residual capacity, meaning in a low-stress static storage role, the battery is not only hugely useful, but it will last at least another 10 to 15 years before it needs to be finally recycled. Now, Jaguar aren't the only company doing this. Nissan and Renault have been doing tests along these lines for many years, but it's great to hear Jaguar are also thinking ahead. I cannot underline strongly enough how battery technology requires us to rethink the role of the car and the technology in the car, and how we simply have to use the materials in these batteries again and again, which is what Northvolt, the Swedish battery maker, is doing in Germany. And yet again, it's another British company, EMR, who are involved in this huge battery recycling plant in Hamburg. Again, the ideas behind building these facilities aren't that new. It was Northvolt's avowed intention from the get-go to build new batteries with the inbuilt design allowing them to be more easily recycled at the genuine end of life after 15, 20, 25, maybe even 30 years of useful service. In fact, in 2021, Northvolt made its first battery using 100% recycled nickel, manganese and cobalt, which means none of those materials had to be dug up, transported and refined. So why did Northvolt ask EMR, or European Metal Recycling, to join them in this new venture? Well, EMR has over 70 years of experience in the metal recycling industry. They know how to break things down, mash things up and turn the resulting piles of bits and bobs into useful material to be used to make new things. In this case, batteries. Now I'm going to round off by once again repeating something blindingly obvious, but we could all repeat this as our little mantra. You can't recycle coal. You can't recycle gas. You can't recycle oil, but you can recycle batteries. End of discussion. That's all. If you have been, thank you for watching.